almost requires that. Notice verse 1. And these things, the word of the Lord after these things, came to Abram. After what things? Well, I'm about to get into that. After what had occurred primarily in chapter 14, verse 17 and following. But anyway, we have that fight going on between Chedorlaomer, and he was the primary leader. 4 other kings were involved in this skirmish, and the fight was on. They lost to the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and Zoar. These 5 were together, and Chedorlaomer, I'll just call him Kedi, and Kedi came with his group and thought he was going to do what he'd been doing, and that is wiping the area clean and taking over everybody. Information came to Abraham, that here's what's going on. Not only did they take our land and terrorize us, but they've captured or kidnapped your nephew Lot. And so Abram decided that's it. He is not putting up with Kedi and his men anymore. And as a result, 318, I think it is, 18 men, 300, that was his army. He went out to meet them and thoroughly devastated them, slaughtered them. The one that was left to do the talking here, the king, the leader of the group of 5, seems to be the king of Sodom. Now remember, Sodom was still in existence then. You already know what's going to happen in this narrative with Lot, but that we haven't got there yet. In 15:1, he's simply talking about the fight that they had with those other men that were terrorizing everybody. They took care of that, and then all of a sudden, Melchizedek appears. And notice it starts in verse 18, chapter 14, 18. Melchizedek, king of Salem. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 verses, 5 verses through 22, through 23. After those events, that involved that king and his people being ruined, here comes another person to appear on the scene, and you don't have but about 6 or 7 verses here regarding this man, Melchizedek. And you read this in order, and you're still talking about this fight, then all of a sudden here's Melchizedek. Verse 18, the king of Salem, or we think Jerusalem, but he came forth, and Abraham paid tithes to this man who was a priest. And you don't read it. Did you know you have a lot more information in the New Testament about this man, Melchizedek, than you find in the Old Testament? This is about the sum of it right here. Chapter 14, verse 17 and following. And then all of a sudden when we read, and after these things, the fight, after meeting Melchizedek, now we pick up in verse 15, chapter 15. Genesis 15 says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, don't fear, Abraham, I am your shield I am your exceeding great reward. Well, we were here at this point last week, and I wanted to point out something, because of all the different things that you can list as happening, first of all, here's another one. It is a first with Melchizedek being mentioned, but also notice, I am thy shield. I assume this is the first time the great I am is mentioned in the Bible. But you come to the New Testament and you're going to see it a lot. For example, we read Jesus saying, I am the light of the world. I am. And then you read the statement, I am the way, the truth, the life, John chapter 14. There's another I am. But the first one was way back here. This has led some people to conclude that one of these angels that made his appearance was actually Jesus Christ in his pre-incarnate state. I don't have any problems with that. That's possibly true. I don't know. But I think it's fascinating to link this together with the first New Testament references. I am. I am the light of the world. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In fact, you read in the book of Exodus, hadn't happened yet as far as our study is concerned right now, but Exodus 3 and verse 14, here's God saying, I am that I am. The am what? I am the eternally existent one. God did not have a beginning. He is endless. As far as you can go back, he's there. As far as you can go into the future, he's there. But that also applies to the other members of the Godhead. They have an eternal nature about them. There never was a time when you could say, here's when they made their entry. Well, that's true regarding Jesus, but that's his physical entry. He was born of the Virgin Mary. But anyway, I am the light of the world. John 14. You can make a sermon just here, a number of sermons on the great I am. Okay, I'm going to slip on over here to another first. Abram is talking with the great I am, God, possibly Jesus in his incarnate state, but he says, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing that I go childless, seeing that I don't have any children, and you made a promise to me that I'm going to be over a great nation, and not only the nation promised, but you also promised that through my seed, someone is coming, Jesus Christ, almost 2,000 years yet in the future. But in my seed, this is going to happen. But I don't have a child. Problem. What are you going to do? I'm going childless. What will you give me? All that I have right now is Eliezer, Genesis 15:2. And he says he was from Damascus. That ought to ring a bell. With Saul of Tarsus on his road to Damascus. But he says, this is him. This is it. This is my seed. Eliezer. And there's only one then in my house, born in my house, but it's not my child. And verse 4 says, and the word of the Lord came to him saying this. Now God answers Abram and says, wait a minute, Abraham. this Eliezer is not the heir that I'm talking about. I'm talking about an heir that shall come forth out of your own body. He uses the term bowels here, your inward parts. But from your own body, this heir is going to proceed. And verse 5 says, he brought them forth abroad and says, I want you to look at something, Abraham. Look up and see if you're able to tell me how many stars there are in the heavens. And he said unto him, that's how it's going to be with your children. All of those that are going to be out in the future. Now, in verse 6, notice, he believed in the Lord. There's another first. The word Genesis means first, the first things happening. And then we have them, one right after the other being mentioned. The beginning of the word believe. I don't think we see that word any time prior to right here. So this would be a first time belief is brought up. Abraham believed God, and it was counted or it was imputed to him for righteousness. Excuse me, we've got a lot of problem with dry mouth. Okay, it was imputed unto him for righteousness, but he believed. This word imputed or counted is a fascinating term. Let me put it on the board over here. This is great because this material is like I was looking in my Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, to find out what this word was, and I figured that's what it was, logizomai. But to show us, which you are both familiar with this rendering, this word right here can be used to show a number. Our English word logic comes from it. Logical. That would be the word logos that you see in John. But what we have here is this other ending, lomai, epithomai. What does that mean anyway? The way to remember it, that I've always remembered it, is the first one, log, L-O-G, by itself. Meaning what? How many times have you ever used the term, he logged it in? If you log something in, what are you doing? You're writing down on a record. Maybe you're keeping business that you've had. So many people came and made this purchase, and I need to log this in because of the IRS boys. What are you doing? You're logging it in. You're writing it into the book or to a list. But that's the term that we have here. It was logged in. What was? It was logged in on Abraham's account, logged in and might say, here's what was done. He didn't do it himself, but it was logged in for him by God in God's record book. Remember, The New Testament and Revelation tells us that God has a book, the book of life, and we're going to be seeing that. But the point here I want to make is that term goes all the way back to Abraham's day at least. It was logged into Abraham for righteousness. That's a brownie point. Give it to him, put it on the record. That's the idea of this term, logged in or imputed. Genesis 15:6 is a wonderful verse. He believed in the Lord, and that belief was counted. As far as Abraham's concerned, it was counted down, written down, logged in God's record book. It was logged in as righteousness. Okay? Faithful obedience. That's the point that we're making. This verse is found 3 times in the New Testament. It's in Galatians chapter 3, Romans chapter 4, James chapter 2, and verse 23. Now, let's take a look then, Genesis 15 and verse 8. And he said, Lord God, how can I verify this? Whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? Inherit what? Well, verse 7 tells you, this land. This land is going to be yours from the Ur of the Chaldees way down south and at the end of that Gulf, south of the river Euphrates, south of, of course, the river Euphrates is eventually going to be going off into the Gulf right down there where today there's, what do they call that, the Suez Canal, I think. Anyway, that's the territory that we're dealing with. Not just the New Testament, all the way back to Abraham. Okay, now, this land, how am I going to inherit it? How shall I know it? Notice God speaks here to Abraham and says, here's how you'll know it, and here's how I'm going to prove it to you. Get a heifer, 3 years old, a she-goat, 3 years old, and a ram, same age, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. In other words, this ceremony is going to be set up to show you and others interested that this is coming from God. And what was it? Sacrificed animals, a cow, sheep, a goat, a pigeon, and a dove. And then what do you do with them? Well, let's read on. Genesis 15. These animals are going to be used as a sacrifice. And not only that, but let's see, verse 9, he took all these animals and laid them one piece over against another piece. But he didn't do the birds that way. It's just those 3 animals. Now, what's this all about? We're seeing here a sacrifice involving blood, and evidently it was intended to conform to a custom that prevailed in that day, that when a covenant was made between 2 people, that is, if you and me, we get together and we have an agreement. To verify that agreement, blood was involved. A covenant was made between 2 parties, and then one person would pass between that which had been ordered sacrificed. On one side you would have one, maybe a calf, and over here you would have a goat. And they would pass through that. And having passed through it is testimony to the world out here that this is a binding, confirmed agreement. Now, following this, I don't know what happened. Probably the animals would be roasted and eaten or simply consumed by the fire. But that's a ceremony that was going on. Okay, now back to real time then. Verse 12. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep came over Abram, and the horror of great darkness. And he, that is God, said to Abram, now watch this promise. God made promises to Noah. God made promises to Adam. God's making a promise here to Abraham. Verse 13, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and they'll serve them, and shall afflict them 400 years. Also that nation whom they shall serve, I'm going to judge them with great substance. I like what's said in verse 13. Notice what we have here is another prophecy that's going to be fulfilled. This land that you could not put a number to it, as far as stars are concerned, your property is going to be huge. It's not going to be yours. You're going to be down there for 400 years in a land that's not yours. But you're going to be imprisoned, or at least you can't leave, for 400 years. And then I'm going to judge that nation. Look at verse 16. In the fourth generation, they shall come here again. I don't know if we have ever realized the impact of that statement. Where is he talking about in verse 16? And they shall come here again. Here where? Way back up, probably in Haran, as they were working their way down. But they'll come here again 400 years later. But the reason I'm waiting 400 years is because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet filled. That's just another prophecy. The Amorites going to come in this part of this nation. You're going to have to displace them, kick them out of the land. And it came to pass, when the sun went down, it was dark. Behold, a smoking furnace, a burning lamp, and they passed between those pieces. And so the God of heaven made a covenant with Abraham. Unto your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. But he didn't actually possess that land at this time. 400 years are going to have to occur, elapse. Your people are going to be taken and put in the land of Goshen, and then just down in Africa, in Egypt. And then after that, you will return to this land. Did you know that I've often thought about this. This is the promised land. The land that flowed with milk and honey. That's what they were told when they were in prison or taken captive down there. And yet, God says, 400 years from now, you're going to come here again, back up north into the promised land. Where's the promised land? The promised land was primarily Syria, what we know today as Israel. But anyway, we get prophecy made about the history of mankind right here with Abraham, and God is telling him what's going to pass. And he mentions a whole bunch of names of people, the Kenites, the Hittites. Let me say this very briefly. The Hittites were a nation that a lot of modern day people said didn't really exist. It's fanciful farce. It wasn't real, because the only place it's found is in the Bible, not in real history. Well, people believed that for quite a while, and then the blade of the archaeologist's shovels dug up a lot of information. Not only they found the name Hittite mentioned, but it was quite a large nation of people. Point, just like the Bible said. That's why this is important material. Okay, God delayed their judgment. He said because the Amorite iniquity is not yet filled. But he did the same thing, didn't he, for Noah? He delayed it 120 years, and then God acted. There is a time coming when God has it up to here, let's say, with people. He's long-suffering. He's wanting man to return to him. And yet, if man is determined to ignore God, God will let it happen until he's had enough. To Noah, he said that the people have become so rotten, evil, that I'm going to do something about it. He delayed it, but he did it for 120 years. Now we have 400 more years that are added. God's not willing that any should perish. We see back in 2 Peter. But anyway, this land, all the way from the river down there, the river of Egypt, which is not a big river, but the river of Egypt, you cross that thing right as soon as you come to that corner where the Mediterranean Sea down here in the southeast corner is located. You pass that river of Egypt, which goes further south, keep on going, and at hundreds of miles over here, 600-700 miles, you'll come up to the Euphrates River. So now we know something more about that. Over further east would be the Tigris River. The time now in Genesis 16 is about 1913, years BC, before Christ. So we're getting closer and closer, a little bit at a time, to when Christ came into the world. Chapter 16 says, verse 1, now Sarah, probably it's pointed, it ought to be called Sarai. But anyway, Abraham's wife bare him no children. Well, we already knew that because of Abraham's complaint to God. How you gonna give me a huge bunch of relatives way on in the future, hundreds of them, when I don't even have a child yet? Problem was, Sarah decided she was going to help God out. And God's in a bad situation right here, and so we will help him. Let's read on. She had a handmaid. Where'd she get her? Probably when they were down there in Egypt during that period of 400 years. Her name is Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, behold now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing. I've kept quiet so long, I'm going to have to speak my piece. Abraham, my husband, go in unto my maid Hagar, so that it may be that I will have children by her. And I'm not going to ask you what you think of Sarah's proposition, because I think I know what you would say, and I think I know you're correct. It was not what God would say. They presumed, that's a presumptuous sin, that God had a problem and he couldn't fulfill the prophecy. Verse 3, Abram's wife, Sarah, took Hagar, the handmaid, and after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife. And verse 4, he went in unto Hagar, she conceived. And then you knew this was going to happen. What? Sarah was despised in the eyes of Hagar. Now, Abraham was about 85 years old. Excuse me. Sarah, 75. So, Hagar, her own personal property, that's what it is. Probably she paid for Hagar, but we don't know for sure. But anyway, she had this, Hagar was hers, and she could tell her what was going to happen. She was the boss. Hagar conceived very quickly, and then she began to despise Sarah. I can imagine that the feeling was mutual. Sarah probably looked with eyes of suspicion. Now, not liking her. She's my handmaid, but I don't like what's happened. It was my idea, but, well, God's purpose has been for a long time monogamy. One woman, one man for a lifetime. You can read Matthew 19. From the beginning, God did not permit multiple wives and so on. But there are polygamous marriages elsewhere in the Bible. We're talking about at one time a man would have this many wives. Who broke the record as far as possessing numbers of wives are concerned? How about Solomon? 700 plus 300 concubines, or reverse that. Anyway, about 1,000. Jacob, a man with an illustrious career, and yet he had multiple wives, polygamy. Moses, David, and yet none of these were a happy polygamous situation. So I've written myself a note here. Joseph Smith. He's an individual of Mormon fame, the leader, their so-called prophet. And it's interesting what's transpired with him, because he also had between 30 and 40 wives. His wife really was Emma, and as I read some of their own work, which I have in my library, it's fascinating material. How did Joseph pull this off? Well, he says, I had a dream, and God told me that it's all right to have multiple wives. And you know who he's talking to? Emma, his wife. she never did put up with it. But here he was with 30 to 40 wives. And he said, God told me this. In fact, he even went further. Evidently, Emma was hard to convince. And so Joseph Smith went so far as to say that God told me to tell you, and he called you by name, Emma. You tell Emma that you are to obey. A lot of people fell for it. I don't think Emma ever did. But with 30 to 40 wives, not only would that be wrong, but in addition to that, he went further and had the wives of his trusted advisors. He even took them as a wife. Well, my point is, God's way is the best. Matthew chapter 19. Okay, eventually, in response to Sarah's complaining, how I would love to have been a fly on the wall to listen to some of that conversation. But after a lot of complaining, Abraham allowed her to deal with Hagar very harshly. By this time, obviously, they didn't like each other. And she complains to Abraham about it. Well, she caused it, but then she complains to Abraham. And he tells her, well, look at verse 6. Abraham said to Sarah, your maid is in your hand. Do to her what pleases you. And when Sarah dealt harshly or hardly with her, she fled, took off. Okay. An angel of the Lord. Some feel this is probably, again, the pre-incarnate Christ. I have no comment on that because I don't know. But an angel, verse 7, of the Lord, angel simply means one sent. An angel is one sent. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water. She made her way out into the wilderness, says verse 7. And the angel said to Hagar, Sarah's handmaid, where'd you come from? And she said, I'm fleeing from the face of my mistress, Sarah. Sarah kicked me out. And the angel said unto her, go back to Sarah and submit yourself under her hand. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your seed exceedingly. And you're going to have a lot of children out there and be a mother of a number of nations. And verse 11 says, the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. In our modern day, we want to know beforehand what the child's going to be. It's going to be a boy or a girl. But they didn't have the same type of knowledge these people did back then. What today we can go and have a certain type of x-rays taken, and you'll have probably 90% chance of having it right, boy or a girl. But you'll have a son. Not only that, you're going to call that boy's name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard thine affliction. And then he mentions, what about all these in the future? He will be a wild man. He'll be against every man's hand against him. He'll dwell in the presence of his brethren. verse 14, this well that she was talking about here is, you can pronounce it better than I can. It's between Kadesh and Bered. So Abraham bears a son. Notice his age. Verse 16. He was 86 years old when Isaac was born. So we've had a number of months pass here between the prophecy and the fulfillment. But let's face it, that's not very long compared to some of the other prophecies, like Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, and Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. They were around many, many years longer than these 13 years. He was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abraham. Why is this important to today's world? For the simple reason that the ill will that's found between that group of people and everybody else, it still exists today. What we're talking about is the history, the long, long history of the Arab people, which descended from Ishmael, is a sort of a historical commentary on the fulfillment of this prophecy. And it's seen in today's Israeli-Arab problem, which has existed for thousands of years. You remember when Trump was president first time about 5 years ago, well, anyway, he was for, 16 to 20 AD. I'm talking about 2016 to 2020. He had what is called the Abraham Accords. And what were they all about? Trying to get the children of Israel and the Arabs together and make peace. This is when it started, and they've been at it ever since. And even as we speak, they're trying their best. That is, the present administration here in America is trying its best to bring peace. Finally, I hope they make it. But unless you can erase thousands of years of history from these people, and if you're able to say, let's put that behind, that's all history, and let's just start anew from this day on, that would be great. But it has a lot of history to get rid of. The next 13 years in history, nothing. After this boy Ishmael was born, we have 13 years again with nothing happening that's recorded for us. Abraham was prospering. His crops, his cattle were growing and so on. And Ishmael, he got to teenage years. I'm saying that because we know he was 13 at least. So he got his teenage years. They'd given all hope of having a child of their own abandoned. After all, how old are they? Well, chapter 17 says Abram was 99. So there's your 86. And then the Bible says years later, 13 years later, what's happening? The Lord appears to Abraham again, gives him another covenant, and reaffirms the first one. The time is about 1898 BC. We'll pick up there next week. Thanks for your attention.
How are you doing? You know, I wasn't pleasant before, so I just need charges for it. Okay, I want to hold film before we get in trouble here. Good morning, how are you doing?
And I spent 35 years in the Department of Defense, civil service, working for a financial aircraft. 35 years. Quality assurance and the idea is that if we find terrorism, that's